I do have his email because he was on our show once before, way back. Anyway, welcome to the Labor.
He said he would do it.
Yeah, well, welcome to the Labor Beat Radio program, broadcasting across the country here from West Virginia and Chicago with my good friends and co-hosts Scott Marshall and J.B. Christensen. And today we're hoping that Dan Kovalik, a very widely a writer of long-standing and a lawyer, very much involved in labor with the steelworkers early in his career, but across the world with the labor movements of many nations. He has, maintained relationships. I'm not quite sure how he funded the entire thing, but it's been fascinating to watch and read about his journey in Brazil, right now in Palestine, Israel, for 6 months ago in Russia and in Ukraine, and he's been in many different places. And he's been very much involved especially in Latin America. I think that's where he started his kind of travels. But anyway, hopefully he will be able to dial in.
Yeah, I'm trying to call him right now.
Oh, okay. So I sent him. Tell him I sent him an invite.
Yeah, he was probably celebrating the holidays, John, like everybody else.
Hey, Dan, you're going to be on the show today?
Who is this?
This is Scott.
Who is this? You got to love that.
Who are you calling for?
Dan Kovalik.
He does not have this number.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, bye.
Oh, boy.
He doesn't have that number anymore.
Oh,
interesting.
Well, there you go. We're going to have to get him through his publisher or something. Well, I had an email for him. Maybe he got it. Didn't bounce, so I don't think.
Yeah, but he
Hey,
probably
Dan,
read
how
it.
are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. Are you going to get on the show today?
Yeah, I don't think I ever got the Zoom, or if I did,
I sent it this morning.
AM or something. So if you send me the Zoom, I'll be glad to be on. I have the time.
Well, he sent you the link by email.
And who sent it?
John Case, and I sent it this morning.
I looked for his name. I thought it would have been him. Let me see here.
Would have been this morning.
Spam folder.
Because I thought he would have sent it.
This morning.
I'm just not seeing it. I wonder
Okay,
if it
I may
ended up somehow in my spam or something.
Well, either that or did I have the wrong email address?
It's Kovalik at Outlook.com.
Okay, hold on. Let me make sure. Let me just check here. Okay, I sent it to. Where is it? Okay. I sent it to dkovalik at usw.org.
Yeah, that's no good. That's no good. It's at Outlook.com.
At Outlook. Same thing, dkovalik at Outlook.com?
That's correct.
Okay, I'm going to resend it to you right now. Okay.
And then should I jump on right away?
Yeah. As soon as you get it, just we'll be talking here, and you can come on, and we'll stop talking for a while. So, yeah, you talk.
For about half an hour.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
That's hilarious. Wrong number, wrong email. That's great. We still got them.
Let's see.
That's pretty damn good.
Yeah.
Now we're only 6 minutes into the show, and we got our guest. That's great. What did you do, Scott? Did you have a good Christmas?
Yeah, we did. We had a lot of the family here. We had a Christmas tree.
Oh, nice.
And had a lot of good food.
Nice.
And we didn't get to go skiing or anything because there's no snow
No.
here now.
No. That must have been weird, huh? You used to snow every year.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
well, like a lot of my friends always say, it's a good thing there's no such thing as climate change.
All right.
Right.
Here comes Dan.
Okay.
There he is.
Oh, boy.
There
Anyway,
he is.
listen, welcome to the
Hello.
Labor Beat Radio Show here this morning.
Thanks
John
for
Case,
having me. I'm really happy to be here.
J.B. Christensen, Scott Marshall, and Dan Kovalik. And Dan, I won't repeat my introduction to you, which I've been just a great admirer of all the work you've been doing and all the information you've been relaying from labor movements and hotspots around the world. It's really extraordinary. I was going to ask you so that you could, we could not wonder about it, is how you finance all these travels. Because I'm just naturally suspicious. I'm sorry.
I appreciate you asking. I have very good credit. I'm about $15,000 in debt, is the truth. I self-finance most of it. I've gotten a little help here and there, but most of the trips I pay for myself, and I've just done it kind of because I've wanted to do it. And yeah, I've ended up kind of going to a little debt to do it. And I have done that periodically over the years. So that now you know the secret. Know the secret.
Well, makes you a very valuable customer. I mean, people that don't ever borrow anything are not really there's no record that they'll ever pay the bank back.
That's right. No, I'm definitely juicing the economy, man.
Right.
The banks are happy with me. So.
All right. Well, tell me about. I know you. I was following your reports from Russia and from Europe, and then all of a sudden I see you're in Palestine or have been in Palestine and Israel, and so. What's the latest, and what, especially with the Palestine-Israel thing? What's your picture there of any possible end game that could be envisioned?
Well, that's hard to know. Of course, predicting the future is always very difficult. I think in the short to medium term. I hate to say it, but as Mr. T said in Rocky III, I predict, sadly, pain, a lot of suffering. I think this is going to go on for a while in some form or another. We know what's happening in Gaza, which is really mass murder every day. The number of children being killed on by the hour is on a level we've never seen before, ever. There's more children being killed in Gaza per hour than were killed in Auschwitz. But meanwhile, in the West Bank, the repression's increasing greatly there. And it had been before October 7th. That's the thing people need to understand. October 7th was not the beginning of history, As Americans, I think, are easily led to believe, just like they were led to believe the collapse of the Soviet Union was the end of history, if you recall. There were, in the last 2 years, a lot of pogroms happening in the West Bank by settlers, but with the either active or passive assistance of the Israeli military. Numerous pogroms in which towns were invaded, businesses destroyed, people killed, people wounded. The Bedouin got it the worst. If you know about the Bedouin communities, which are nomadic shepherding communities, about 6 of those communities were actually displaced due to pogroms in the last couple of years. And you see these communities. So I entered from Amman, Jordan. And and you cross the King Hussein Bridge across the Dead Sea to get into the West Bank. And as you drive from there to either Jerusalem or Ramallah, wherever you're going, I went to Ramallah, you see a lot of the Bedouin communities on the side of the road in the desert. And you notice they have their own water tanks. Actually, I looked very closely for that because I wondered, where are these people getting their water from? And it turns out that the Israelis actually don't allow them to plug into the water supply or electric supply. And this is a means, of course, to make it hard for them to survive and to force them to move on. But a lot of those communities, as I said, have been harassed and invaded and forced to leave. But that's happening throughout the West Bank. I mean, one of the hardest hit places is Jerusalem, where the Israelis are really making a play to take over all of Jerusalem. And of course, with the active encouragement of the U.S., you might recall that Donald Trump, in total violation of international law, recognized East Jerusalem as part of Israel, and moved for the first time the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which was a hugely provocative act. Only a couple other countries followed suit. And of course, Biden has not countermanded that at all, with the embassy still in Jerusalem. East Jerusalem, under international law, is Palestinian land. It should be part of Palestine. It should be administered by the Palestinian Authority, but it's not. And of course, this is where all the holy sites are. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the third most sacred site in Muslim, in the Islamic faith, but also Christian sites. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is where Jesus' body was reportedly buried for 3 days until he rose. The church where the Virgin Mary is said to be entombed. The Mount of Olives. I mean, that's East Jerusalem. This is the Holy Land. And you may take note of the fact that the operations by Hamas and related militant groups on October 7th was called the Al-Aqsa Flood. And it was, of course, named after the mosque and relating, I think, to the hugely provocative acts of the Israelis trying to take over the Al-Aqsa Mosque in various ways. So in any case, it's a very, very troubled time in the Holy Land, in the West Bank. Not as bad as Gaza, but of course, one of the Christian patriarchs in Bethlehem, and I made it to Bethlehem, the Lutheran minister, he gave an amazing homily on the day before Christmas Eve. And he expressed what a lot of Palestinians are wondering in the West Bank, and that is, are we next? I mean, they're already arresting thousands of people in the West Bank. They've killed about 300 Palestinians on the West Bank since October 7th. That's more than were killed in all of last year. But as this minister was wondering, are they going to start bombing them to smithereens too? And I think that's a legitimate question. So I guess that's a long way to answer that. I think we're in for a very rocky road for the near future. And I think the people of Gaza, right now, Netanyahu, he's been very open about this, but he just gave a speech or had a meeting, I believe it was with the Knesset, saying he's looking for countries that will take the people of Gaza. He's planning on getting rid of every single one of them. I mean, this is a giant ethnic cleansing and genocide we're looking at. I mean, there's no question about that. And it's happening in real time. We're watching it on video. We're watching babies being killed every day. Again, at a rate never seen before. More journalists have been killed in Gaza than in any conflict we know of, over 100 so far. Over 100 UN staff people have been killed in Gaza, more than have been killed in any conflict since the founding of the United Nations. I mean, this is a uniquely bad circumstance we're witnessing. I mean, if it seems that way, in fact, it is that way.
Wow.
So I think in the long term, Israel's finished. I think Israel, they always had this cloak of moral superiority and of holiness. That's gone. I mean, I think most of the world now sees it was a lie. I mean, the most moral army in the world, as it calls itself, is now seen as the most immoral, cowardly army in the world. And I think with that that veneer of holiness gone, I just think that ultimately the Zionist project will fail. But in the meantime, the question is what's going to happen to the Palestinian people? Will the people of Gaza survive? Will they be thrown out? Possibly into the Sinai Desert, which is what that's plan number one that the Israelis have.
What do the Israeli people think about this onslaught, Dan? This is JB here.
Yeah.
What do they think? What do the majority of the people think?
The vast majority support it. The vast majority want to get rid of the Palestinians. There's obviously some opposition. There is a small peace movement that opposes that, but it's small, and it's smaller than it used to be. I mean, the left has, there's still a communist party there, but it's very small. There used to be, Israel was founded on what was called socialist Zionism. I mean, it used to have a strong left there. I mean, there was always a tension between socialism and Zionism, which is a racist philosophy. Obviously, racist socialism is kind of a contradiction in terms, but there was a sort of socialist ethos to the project, but that's gone largely, which is true in most of the world. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the left was in full retreat, and that was true in Israel too. And as the right wing has taken over, the leftists have left. They've gone, right? Which, of course, is the option for most Israelis. I mean, we have to face that, right? The Palestinians, this is where they live. They don't have any options, right? Most Israelis can go somewhere else. And the leftists did. So the ground has been ceded to the right wing. That's why Netanyahu has been prime minister for over 20 years. I mean, Israel hasn't existed for even 80. That's more than a quarter of their existence, right? So it's mostly right wing. And if you listen, if you go on Twitter, the people I follow, you'll see these interviews with the man on the street, and they say the most vile thing about the Palestinians. I mean, most Israelis view them as animals, or worse than animals. Again, there are exceptions, and I met exceptions, and God bless them. They're beautiful, beautiful people, right?
Dan.
But that's the exception. That's not common. And I'll tell you an interesting poll. Zogby, the Zogby poll. Well, Zogby himself, I saw a recent tweet of his, and he said several years ago, Zogby did a poll in Israel, Palestine, on the idea of a one-state solution. And the vast majority of Israelis supported a one-state solution, but that would be a Jewish state that was completely cleansed of Palestinians. The majority of Israelis' idea of a one-state solution is all the Palestinians are gone.
Dan.
The Palestinians, on the other hand, polled. A majority also wanted a one-state solution, but they wanted a one-person, one-vote state regardless of ethnicity or race. That is, they wanted a pluralistic, multicultural, multiracial, one state that would include Jews and include current Israelis. And I think that shows a lot, and that is I think where the people are at in the respective camps.
All right, hold on a second. Scott, you had a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, Dan. Tell us more about your conversations with the Communist Party in Israel.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, there's not a lot of folks there, but the couple of folks I talked to, I mean, that's a multi-ethnic party that has Israelis and Palestinians, and they're very against what's happening to the Palestinian people. They still tend to opt for more of a two-state solution, but, one in which the Palestinians would have a real state, which has been largely destroyed by the possibility that has been largely destroyed by Israel. But, they would like to see that. And they certainly think what's happening in Gaza is an abomination, and what's happening in the West Bank is also terrible. But again, you're talking about a very small group of people. But there are other, again, left-wing Israelis. Again, not many, but I met some of those folks, and they're very impressive people who, they risk their own lives and their own freedom to do what they do because the other Israelis don't like them and the settlers hate them. They're seen really as race traitors, but and the one guy who took me to Bethlehem, it's very hard to get between Ramallah and Bethlehem these days. That should be pointed out, right? Because of all the walls and gates and checkpoints that Israel set up after the Oslo Accords were agreed to in 92. Israel, Palestine, however you want to call it, which should be a very tiny country, and that was very clear to me in a way I didn't realize till I was there. Everything's close to everything else. I mean, to get, for example, from Jerusalem to Lebanon should take you maybe 2 hours drive. Okay, to get from Ramallah to Jerusalem should take you about 15, 20 minutes. It's only 8 miles away. But it took me to get there an hour and a half because of, all the walls and the checkpoints. To get from Ramallah to Bethlehem, that's 15 miles. That should take you about half an hour, even in traffic. Took me 3 hours to get there and 4 hours to return. We actually drove all the way around Bethlehem. Bethlehem's to the south of Ramallah. And the guy who took me, who is Jewish, who was born, he has an Israeli passport and a British passport, because he was born in Palestine when it was Palestine and when it was a British protectorate. And he offered to drive me. He's almost 80 years old. But he wanted to make sure I got there, because he has a yellow license plate because he's Israeli, he can travel freely. And because he has a British passport, he can get into Bethlehem, which is an Area A, which actually Israelis are technically not allowed into, though the Israeli army goes in there all the time, and though it's not allowed in there. Even by Israeli law, it's not allowed in there, but it goes in anyway. But technically, with an Israeli passport, he wouldn't be allowed in. So we went as international tourists with my U.S. passport and his British passport. But in order to avoid some of the more difficult checkpoints, which he knows where they are, we went all the way around and entered in the south of Bethlehem. And again, that took 3 hours to do. But he feared if we didn't do that, we wouldn't have gotten in at all, because he's a known person who spent time in jail under the Israelis in Galilee, by the way, because of his opposition to, the Israeli treatment of the Palestinians. He was afraid if we hit a checkpoint that had computers and they looked him up and looked me up, they wouldn't let us through. Maybe they'd even do something. So he found a way to avoid that. And it takes 3 hours to get there, which is pretty incredible. Again, it's only 15 miles away.
Let me ask a question. Let me ask a couple of more general derivative questions from your remarks.
Yeah, please.
Well, the first is, what is the best posture that the United States should take with respect to the many levels of assistance that we and long-term alliances that we have with Israel? What's the best thing that an administration could do to reduce the violence and stop it, if that's possible? Second question
Well,
is,
it is possible.
hold on,
It could be done.
I want you to, hold on, I want you to go two. And the second question really has to do is, are religious or so-called ethnically pure states, are they viable in this new globalized world at all, really? Okay,
yeah, well,
ahead.
I'll start with the second question. I mean, no. And we don't accept it anywhere else, right? We would not accept this anywhere else. We wouldn't accept in the U.S. imposing Christianity on people or having a Christian, a society where Christians have more rights than Jews or Muslims. No one would accept that, right? We have a pluralistic constitution. It's been very imperfectly carried out at times, very imperfectly, but over time we've tried to become a truly pluralistic country. We believe that's the way to go, and I believe that's the way to go, right? People moved here for religious freedom. You might remember that they were called the Puritans, right? So no one believes that this is proper. No one likes, everyone thinks the Islamic Republic of Iran is wrong for having a theocracy. No one, but by the way, they're more pluralistic, I would argue, than Israel is, and we can get into that. But I've been to Iran. They have Armenian Christian churches. They have synagogues there. They have the second largest Jewish population outside of Israel in the Middle East. But we don't accept this in any other country. We don't think Modi's good in India for being a Hindu nationalist and anti-Muslim. We don't accept this anywhere else. So my answer is, this was never appropriate. And that's part of the problem. This was never going to work the way it was structured in 1948. It was bound to end this way with mass brutality. And it began that way with the Nakba, in which 700,000 Palestinians were forcibly displaced. I mean, violently. And it will end that way, sadly. So that's my answer to your second question. My answer to your first is, Biden could stop this in a second. And you know how we know that? Because during the Lebanese war, Israeli-Lebanese war beginning in 1982, Ronald Reagan, not a great guy, but even he was offended by the civilian killings by Israelis in Lebanon. And he called Menachem Begin, who, by the way, Begin was a self-described terrorist. Remember, he helped blow up the St. David Hotel at one point. He called Begin, the prime minister of Israel, and he said, hey, you got to cut it out. This is not appropriate. And guess what? He cut it out. And by the way, guess who told Begin he should go even harder against civilians? A senator from Delaware named Joe Biden. Even Begin had to distance himself from Joe Biden because of his, incredible tolerance for the death of civilians in Lebanon. And we're seeing this. We're seeing Biden manifest right now with his tolerance of what's happening. So what's Biden doing? Biden's saying, I'm telling Netanyahu, hey, dude, man, we're not on the same page here. You can't be killing all these civilians. Meanwhile, of course, Netanyahu's publicly saying that he and Biden are on the same page. And they are. And you know how we know? Because I don't care what Biden's saying. As the New York Times reported last week, Biden has sent Israel 5,000 2,000-pound bombs. Let me repeat that. He has sent them 2,000-pound bombs, and he sent them 5,000 of those, okay? These are mega bombs that Israel's dropping on whole neighborhoods.
Gaza's completely razed.
And the same Times are an AP story which said this is one of the worst conflicts we've ever seen. Said it looks differently from space now than it did before October 7th.
I bet. Yes.
In Afghanistan, U.S. military leaders said they would not use 500-pound bombs on urban populations because they're too devastating. Israel's using 2,000-pound bombs that destroy entire neighborhoods at once. They're destroying entire bloodlines of people. People are losing 20 family members at a time. I read of a story of a journalist who lost 70 family members at a time. I don't have 70 family members that I know of. Okay, this is amazing. This is incredible. And Biden is sending those bombs knowing they're going to be used. Okay, so I don't care what he says to the public. I don't care what Blinken, who's a complete sociopath, is saying. We are full on board with this genocide. And so first of all, I would start with this. The U.S. should not be giving them these bombs, should not be giving them any weapons right now, should not be giving them cover at the United Nations, which they've been doing. I don't think we should give Israel military assistance at all. I think that Dan,
I got another question.
Yeah.
I think it would be. I didn't realize that the Nebo Proctor library was still open and still being used for gatherings. And when I got the invitation and heard your report, but tell us. I think people might like to know about that library, and I mean it's one of the best libraries in the whole country in terms of left-wing Marxist literature and old stuff and new stuff. Anyway, tell us more about that event and the events that you have there all the time. I didn't realize that you guys were still having all these events there. So.
Yeah, well, so that's the Marxist Library in Berkeley, and it has been around a long time. It's a great library, as you say. And they have, I want to say, weekly events. I'm not sure if they're weekly or monthly, but they have very regular events with speakers like myself on a whole range of topics. And they used to be in person. I know during the pandemic they stopped having them in person, and I get the impression from that Zoom call they haven't gone back to in person. They're still doing them over Zoom, which is great for people not living in Berkeley because you can access them and watch them either at the time or the recordings, which they put up on YouTube. And it's also, I would say, it's not just a building, it's really a club. I mean, the people who support it, who volunteer there, who have the meetings there, they're Marxists. And so, it's a great place. Again, you can do it by Zoom to interact with other Marxists, old school Marxists.
Yeah.
Sadly, meaning old people, right? I mean, the
old.
Truth is these are pretty old people like us.
I'll say that again.
Like us.
We're not doing a great job at reproducing ourselves. I mean, well, I guess I don't want to totally oversell that, but I mean, there's some truth to that. Certainly with the Marxist Library, I think probably the mean age is probably 65, and that's probably being generous. Not that that's terrible. I mean, I've always liked the old comrades. I mean, that's who I learned from. But we do need to reproduce ourselves a bit. But anyway, it's a great institution, and it's one, again, young people should be supporting because it could die with this generation of people is the truth of it if things don't change. I mean, someone who used to belong to it was Michael Perenni, who still lives in Berkeley, who I got to meet a couple years ago, who's basically I would say of all the leftists alive today, he would be my mentor of mentors. Sadly, he he's in his 80s now, and he doesn't do any public speaking or writing anymore. He doesn't have the same faculties that he used to have. But of course, he was a giant for me.
Great guy.
Even
Yes.
better than Chomsky's been a hero of mine too. But I would say he's better than Chomsky. And of course, he had some critiques of Chomsky as an anti-communist, which I think are correct.
I want to ask another
Just-
question. I want
go
to
ahead.
change the subject because I want to go back to the Middle East for a moment because I resist the interpretation that Biden or, as you say, Blinken, who's I've got similar terms for him, but I'm not a believer that these guys speak just for themselves. That there are powerful interests involved. I mean, for example, the cynicism with which the U.S. and the U.K. in the late 40s and later used Israel as a cat's paw in oil politics in the Middle East, which drive the production of the world. Okay, or have been for most of the rest of the century. And I just look at the list of secretaries of state and defense through the 50s and 60s, and I see people from the oil interests more often than not dominating what is defined as the strategic interests of the United States. And so it's very difficult to separate the thing that Biden could do with a couple of decisions and the rather large corporate and billionaire interests, maybe trillionaire interests involved. So you're talking about a systematic issue. I remember, for example, I thought a great moment in Oliver Stone's film about Nixon was one that I had actually heard. I didn't witness myself, but I had actually heard of from a friend of mine who was at in 1970 at the Lincoln Memorial at one of the anti-war marches where Nixon did appear on the with a bunch of staff people in the middle of the night trying to explain that he was a peace candidate or a peace president. And
Right.
In the process, he explained that he really was trying to make peace, except, it's like trying to ride a tiger, and everybody tells him, you seem like you're talking about a wild animal. And he says, it is. If I get off it, it eats me. And if I don't get off it, it eats me. So, and then, so I think we have a systematic issue here in how does an imperial state retreat except through military or complete diplomatic defeat? Really?
Well, yeah. So first of all,
One more just real quick question too, because I don't know, we don't have much time. But what do you think about the decline of anti-communism in the labor movement?
yeah, well, that's very exciting to me. It's also very exciting to me that some of the unions have taken public positions in support of the ceasefire, the UAW, I believe, and the Postal Union. Of course, these are great developments. I think the union movement is the healthiest it's been politically in a long time. So that makes me very happy. In terms, John, of what you were saying, of course, we're Marxists here. There's a ruling class that dictates these policies. And that's why you see almost no difference between Biden and Trump on the Israel issue, or even with a Bobby Kennedy who's running as a third party and peace candidate. He's probably more pro-Zionist than even the other two, if you listen to him. Obviously, the ruling class calls the shots, though I do think I'd like to believe, because if what I'm about to say is not true, then we'd all just be packing up and quitting, which none of us want to do. I think there are, though, on the margins, things that can be changed and done. That is to say, let's even take the case of Nixon. Nixon was considering nuking Vietnam, and then there was a huge, historically big protest in D.C. to protest that, and I think he was pushed back from that brink. So, yes, he was probably cajoled into supporting the Vietnam War. But did he have to use the nuclear bomb against Vietnam? Probably not. Does Joe Biden, even though he has to support Israel to survive politically, does he have to send 2,000-pound bombs? Are people actually forcing him to do that? I don't know. But the point is, probably that's somewhere that's, on those margins, something protest and other things can be done to stop that, right? A friend of mine, an old commie friend of mine from Dayton, used to say, Dan, the U.S. is like a giant elephant. If it just rolls the wrong way, 10,000 more people die. And it's true. And so anything we can do to prevent this bloodshed in Gaza, again, right now, 20,000 people have been killed, right? Over 20,000, 10,000 children. This is unacceptable. But if we could stop it there and prevent 100,000 people from being killed, or 200,000 or whatever, that is worth it. And yes, the ruling class is going to, short of a revolution, dictate certain policies, but on the margin, we can save lives. And that's what I think our efforts are for. Even the case of Reagan and that discussion he had with Begin shows there's some room for maneuvering, Again, if I didn't think that were true, I wouldn't be protesting all the time. I obviously think there's some ability to do that. So that's my 2 cents on that. But I mean, I basically agree with you. So when we go into November, is there going to be a candidate, a viable candidate you could vote for that is going to have a different Israeli policy? No, absolutely not. And that's a shame,
Cornel West, maybe.
Cornel West for sure, but again, he's not a viable candidate. I mean, sadly, he's barely a serious candidate. He's not even associated with a party. He won't get on most ballots. No. Yeah, you might as well write in, Evo Morales or something, which maybe I'll do. I've written in Fidel Castro before, so just for fun. But
I'm put in John Case. I'm gonna vote for John Case.
Look, vote for John Case. Exactly.
I'm not going to endorse the anything related to Trump, either by de facto. If Biden's running against Trump, I'm voting for Biden.
Exactly.
And so I'm not going to, because otherwise you're headed into. Forget about foreign policy. You're going to be talking about defending your life here in West Virginia. Okay, so
do we have to have another big protest?
We have to have. I like Sean Fain's stuff. Spread the strike movement. If you can move the strike movement, even if it takes time to develop, if you can move it into the public sphere, okay, over something that. It's got to be over shit that solidarity will grow, not decline. Okay, it's got to be the solidarity is the power. Once you get people to feel that power, okay, that it really is something that can move mountains. All right, well then they become addicted to it. All right, they do, because there's not too many other good choices around, and you try it out. And you take the auto workers, you do it, and you have an impact. You have an impact, that ordinary individuals in the working class don't ever have.
Yeah, and if the AFL would take a position, for example, against, for a ceasefire, it could change everything. I mean, the Democrats still depend on unions for, their base, and that could be big. And again, some of the actions we're seeing in the grassroots, they clogged up the expressway to O'Hare Airport yesterday. Yeah. Those are very important actions. Oh yeah, Scott, you would know that, being from Chicago.
Yeah.
So let me end because I'm going to have to go. I'm actually doing I'm helping someone with asylum today. I got my hand in many, many things.
Oh, well, I would
including...
think it's great that you could join us. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
I love talking to you, Dan.
This
It's
has
just
been a
great.
great show.
You
Yeah.
too.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it is.
And if I can end on a good note, because I like that, it's important
Do
to
that.
end on a positive note. One of the things I've had my hand in is the case of Alex Saab. If you don't know him, he is a Venezuelan diplomat who was in jail for 3 years, basically because he was helping Venezuela get food and medicine in flouting the U.S. sanctions against Venezuela. He was released last week from a prison in Miami. He's home in Venezuela with his family. And that has a lot to do with grassroots support that he got in the United States and other countries. So protest and activism works. I want to just end with that because
Okay.
that's important to think about. Yeah.
Amen.
And guys, thank you very much.
Just real quick, Dan. I think it's so important that, like you were saying about all these young people, that they are leading all of these struggles and winning.
Yes.
And they are and they are looking for national contracts. That is a contract for all Starbucks workers, for all Amazon workers. And that's remember what that did to the labor movement way back when.
Yeah.
I think it's just a great time for these young people.
It is. It's the future. We do have a future. Leftism has a future. Socialism has a future. And you're right. And the young people are carrying the torch. And it's important to recognize it. Absolutely.
And our party is recruiting people all over the place.
Yes, I've seen that, and it's wonderful. I'm very happy to see that.
Well, Dan, can you come back sometime and talk to us about the Ukraine and Russian visits that you were doing earlier this year? Because that's a whole other topic. I would love to hear your personal experiences on that.
I'd love to come back. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Labor Beat, and goodbye from Labor Beat today. And our podcast will be up before the end of the day here, I think. Anyway, take care of each other. It's late, but everything comes next.